Hi, this is Randal Schwartz, host of FLOSS Weekly. This week, Aaron Newcomb joins me to talk about Ganymede, the one source of truth for all your directory systems. You'll want to hear about this, so stay tuned.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for FLOSS Weekly is provided by Cachefly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is FLOSS Weekly with Randal Schwartz and Aaron Newcomb, episode 143 for November 24th, 2010, Ganymede. It's time for FLOSS Weekly, the show about free, libre, open source software, coming to you weekly, or as often as I can anyway. Who am I? I'm Randal Schwartz, your host, Merlin at Stonehenge.com. I bring you this show because I love talking to people about open source software and how it's being useful for people, being available for people. Big projects, little projects, doesn't matter. I like to hear about what people are doing with open source software. And I always tend to like to have a co-host so I can chat and just not sit here talking to the mic all by myself. This week's co-host, you've heard him here before. It's our wonderful, again, welcome back, Aaron Newcomb.
Hey, happy Thanksgiving.
Yeah. For those that are watching the show live or listening to it fairly closely after we go live, it should be right around Thanksgiving here in the U.S., so loving that. And I'm planning a big celebration tomorrow, for those that are watching live. And I have also, in case you're watching the video feed, you'll see behind me something you haven't seen in quite a while. I actually have the wonderful stained glass behind me that has been on many of the shows, and the wonderful Blue Yeti mic that makes my voice sound so much more deep and amazingly cool instead of the stupid little iPhone headset that I've been using in some of the recent shows. I'll just hold off till the end of the show to talk about what's special about that stained glass for this week. Instead, what I'd rather do is bring on or talk about our guests, at least the shows we have this week. We have a really interesting project. We have the Ganymede project, and this was introduced to me by somebody who wanted this to be on the show. In fact, I think actually the project leader, Jonathan Abbey, wrote me and said, I want you to have Ganymede on your show. And Jonathan Abbey is one of the project leaders of Ganymede, been around it since the beginning. And what Ganymede does is it takes, at least from what I can see from looking at the documentation here, it centralizes the source of truth for all of the information that an organization has about users and hosts and IP addresses and things like that. And it allows you to kind of edit it all in one place and have it squirted out in all the various formats that it needs. We also have Volker Bauer on the show. He's apparently a big user at his organization of Ganymede and has done some nice bolt-ons to handle DNS and things like that for it. So we've got both of them on the show today from various geographical locations. And anything you want to say, Aaron, before we get into the show?
Yeah, well, I've done some, I went to their website, and so like you say, like you mentioned, I kind of understand how it works, but I'm still a little bit confused about what it does and how you implement it. It's still a little sticky, so I'm anxious to talk to these guys and find out how it works.
Well, let's not wait any longer. Let's go ahead and bring them on.
Hi, thanks, Randal. Long-time caller. Sorry.
Long-time listener, first-time caller?
That's right.
There we go.
That's right.
I'll take that. And we'll go ahead also and bring on Volker. Volker, welcome on the show.
Hello. Hi. Welcome.
And you're quite a distance from me, I understand, Volker. Where are we talking to you from?
Yeah, I'm actually located in Frankfurt. So I'm in a training center in Frankfurt in Germany.
Oh, very cool. Very cool. And Jonathan, where are you at?
Austin, Texas.
Austin, very good. All right. Yes, just like your notes said you were. Okay, well, now I'm finally reading the notes. There we go. So I gave a kind of a brief interview about Ganymede as we opened the show, but I probably did a pretty poor job of it because I just was reading my notes and stuff. So why don't you give us sort of the first, actually, I want to do this slightly differently than I do in most of the shows. I want to first look at the problem space. What is the problem that Ganymede solves? And then we can talk about what it actually is to solve that.
That's a very good way to deal with this question. When you have a... the problem is networking. The problem is, what do you do when you have hundreds or thousands of systems that have to work together, and you have to have your users work together? You have to have an environment where all the resources are available, all the resources are manageable, right? You've got, and let me talk about our case. It would be easier to illustrate the larger case. we have, say, 2,000, 3,000 systems. We have on the order of 800 users. We have email to be dealt with. We have printers. We have network allocations. We have domain name registrations. We have DHCP. We have security protocols. We have devices that need to be configured to maintain our policies, our procedures. We have all kinds of web applications and non-web applications that all need to know about permissions and users and everything of that kind. And so you have all of these things that have to be coordinated and managed, and you may need to have, like in our case, we have probably 50 systems administrators, all of whom are in different parts of our organization, all of whom need to have common management access to this great pool of directory services information. That's what we're talking about. What Ganymede is a software system for doing that kind of management in a very intelligent fashion, where you can have all these administrators with delegated privileges over certain parts of the system. You have an intelligent server that knows what kind of data you're managing, what kind of constraints and policies have to be maintained. And then you have a back-end system which goes out and says, okay, we're going to build our NIS, we're going to update our Active Directory, our Open LDAP, our Open Directory, our DNS, our DHCP, our Samba, our TACAX, our VPN router configuration, are all these applications. So you need to have a method by which you can manage the changes intelligently, audit the changes. You need a method by which that can be put into your environment and have it all work. And that's what Ganymede does.
Okay, so just to bring it back to something practical that I can relate to. So let's say I was in a large organization and, okay, you're in a large organization. Yeah, so let's say I was in a large organization and I want to be Randal Schwartz all the way through the organization, just have like one identity. But obviously in different parts of the organization, I may have different roles. Like in QA, I may have to have administrator privileges to be able to do the testing that I have to do there. But for like the main systems, the actual production systems, I really don't want to be able to have administrator privileges. But I really want to be the same Randal Schwartz, maybe with a login of Merlin all the way through. So this is something that Ganymede would be able to manage then.
Yes. Or rather, it's something you could build with Ganymede. Ganymede is a software system for hosting data, for managing changes to the data, for basically providing an intelligent GUI in front of all of this data. But then it's up to the adopter to take that data and then write all the scripting to incorporate it into their environment in whatever way they choose. Okay. So in your case, you have all these different domains. Like maybe you want to have a sudoers file that is edited by it. You want to have all these things that where the data actually meets your various systems, all of whom may not be able to talk a consistent network protocol for getting their authentication or authorization. So Ganymede would be a part of that, but then you'd have whatever you wanted to distribute that data and incorporate that data into all your systems.
So this is basically a hub where I would have front-end APIs that would allow me as an individual user, say, to update my password once and only once, and maybe system administrators or people who are responsible for particular domains to say, and yes, and Randal, this identity Randal here gets QA privileges, sysadmin privileges on the QA machines, and this other guy over here says, but he's not going to be sysadmin on the production system. So you'd have that sort of front-end interface, and then so Ganymede's sort of in the middle, being the hub, the one source of truth for all this knowledge. And then you have various filters and things that suck the data from that to put it into the set of password files and the LDAP files and all that sort of thing. Does that describe it well?
That's right, yeah.
Okay, and one of the things I know, like the organization I'm working at for my primary job right now, which is really odd since one time I'm not actually there while we're doing the show. I have, the first day I came in, they said, here's your Windows password and here's your Unix password. And it drove me nuts. It's like I can't update either one of them. They're in some magic files that are a long ways away from you. So something like Ganymede would probably solve that, right?
Right. That's something that doesn't happen where I work. We have anything you talk to is using passwords managed by Ganymede. Now, in your environment, they could. So So there's several ways to approach the problem, right? With something like Ganymede, you maintain a Unix password distribution system and a Windows password distribution system, and they all get the same data from Ganymede, and so they all stay in sync. Some places choose to have Active Directory or another common directory service and then force everything to talk to that. And that can be a challenge because that means you have to have control over every possible system that needs that data. Whereas with Ganymede, you push it out, and then the system administrator can write the scripts to make sure that the data gets to all of the recipients in the form that's most convenient for them.
So would you attach it to something like, say, Puppet to make sure it gets pushed out, some configuration tool like that?
You certainly could. We don't. We use, in our laboratory, we use a number of standard directory services for doing that.
Oh, very cool. Very cool. Now, what's the history of Ganymede? How did it arrive?
The laboratory I work at has had a complicated networking infrastructure for a long time. I've been here since the late 80s. And in the early 90s, about 92, we decided to figure out how to, we had at that time, we had NIS, we had DNS, and those, if you know, for a Unix administrator, those are just text files that you edit on a server someplace. Well, we also had 7 or 8 different different laboratories within the lab, right? So there was no practical way for all of those administrators to be getting their hands dirty and messing with the source files for our directory services at that time. So what we wanted to do was be able to delegate those privileges out and have them use a tool that would allow them to share managed access to these directory services. Sure. And we also wanted to have a consistent networking environment where things like NFS auto-mounter exports were managed, where email routing was handled, where it all fit together as a cohesive whole. So we wrote a program called GASH, the Group Administration Shell, which allowed them to do that. But it was a limited tool where a user would have to take turns running this C language command line interface on our main server. And so we used that for a few years, and then we decided we needed something better. So we started the Ganymede project in 1995 to make a Java-based distributed application that would allow all of our admins to be concurrently working with the data while having that data be appropriately managed transactionally and then put into our environment.
Wow, cool. That's and then so from 1985 till now, it's just become 95. Even better, faster. Oh, sorry, yeah, it's just become better, faster, and cheaper, right?
Right. It was always cheap. It was always cheap, but yeah, it's had a lot of elaborations over the last 15 years.
And I understand you just released version 2.0?
Well, if you actually look at the website, we've had 2.0 for the last 7 years, which is to say that I've never quite officially blessed it as 2.0, but I've been continuing to patch it and improve it and all that time. Yeah. Okay. So 2.0 real soon now.
Cool.
So I'm still trying to get this is Aaron, I'm still trying to get my head wrapped around this. I mean, what are the closest competitors, either, you know, proprietary or open source, that would compare to Ganymede? Are we talking like, you know, Sun Identity Manager, that type of software would be similar?
I'm not familiar with the Sun Identity Manager. I would say that like some of the things that NetIQ does, that AttachMate does, they have a lot of this kind of management software. Ganymede is it's not a directory server. It's not like Active Directory or Open Directory or Open LDAP. It's a management front end to that. So if you were to go to NetIQ, they have proprietary solutions that do that give you all these management tools that then feed into all these things. People have used the term meta directory for a long time, and unfortunately they've at times meant different things by that. But basically it's a directory service that manages other directory services, or through which that can integrate the different directory services into a coherent whole. And Ganymede plays in that space.
Okay, so it's more of a centralized management functionality that you're offering.
That's right.
Okay.
Centralized with a lot of it provides the ability to put a lot of custom intelligence into it in a very interactive way, so that we try to provide a tool that is very fail-safe for the end users. We want to. Our goal was that we could have our secretaries be managed in our DNS, for instance. Things like that, where Ganymede would know about all the rules, would enforce the rules, would guide the user as they made the changes, with a consistent object model that it hosted. And then the users would work with that object model, and then Ganymede and the scripts that it fed into would be responsible for actually getting that into the network in various ways.
Okay. So in terms of implementation, I'm just trying to wrap my head around how this would get implemented. Typically, this would run on its own server, and then there'd be configuration, obviously, that you'd have to do to tell Ganymede where all your other services are, right? All your DNS services, your NIS services, LDAP, for example, can be quite cumbersome or quite easy, depending on how you implement it, but to get it up and running. So I'm just trying to figure out, maybe walk me through a little bit how the implementation would go of this type of setup. How difficult is it?
It depends on your expertise level. It depends on what you're doing. The more complicated your environment, the more difficult it will be. The way to think of Ganymede is that you write Java code that writes out whatever kind of source files you want to deal with. We have a kit that would knows how to write out password group data, right? So you have some Java code that takes the object model whenever a transaction occurs, whenever a build happens, it writes out data to a directory on a Unix system, and then you write your scripts to take that data and send it wherever you like. Traditionally, Ganymede was designed around a model where Ganymede would write out a complete dump of what it thought the state of the world should be. Something like you'd have with NIS, where every time you do a build, you're completely replacing your current data with the new data. Sorry, let me back up. So what you'd have to do is, let's say that you've got an environment and you have your own scripts to manage the data. You have source files to...
It gets complicated, sorry. I can tell.
Yes, sorry, it does. It does. So what the user has to do, they have to be able to have scripts that take whatever kind of source data they want and propagate it into their environment. So in the case of someone wanting to manage DNS, say, like Volker's team does, they have Ganymede write out data files, which then their scripts take and put into their environment. So they have to have the scripts written, right? They have to have the ability to take some kind of data output and push it into their environment. The complexity of that depends on the complexity of what it is you're wanting to do. If you're wanting to do a traditional Unix environment with NIS, that's trivial. You have Ganymede write out the NIS source files. You point it to where the build script is, and that's all you need to do on the back end. You also have to create the object model in the front in Ganymede so that you can say, well, these are the types of objects we want to manage. These are relationships among them. So it can be relatively straightforward. It can be extremely complicated. It depends on how much intelligence you want in your management solution and how complicated your network you're pushing into is.
Right, right. So maybe, Volker, if you're there, maybe you can give us a kind of an example of if you're managing DNS. I mean, how hard was it? What did you have to do to get it all up and running? So we can get like a specific example.
Yeah. Okay. In our environment, we set it up for DNS. So we finally build up bind config files, and the second thing we set up is an ISC DHCP server. So the work you had to do is you have to write some Java or Perl code to get the data out of Ganymede into the correct format for the bind configs or for the ISC. And you have to specify your objects you need depends on your location. For example, in IP management, we have end systems, we have interfaces, IP addresses, and you have to arrange the front end for that. So there's a lot of things you have to do on your own, but nevertheless, for us, the discussion or decision was we would like to use a framework, and so we used Ganymede as a framework for our tool, which is called Dr. DNS, and it was a very, very easy front-end generation. And so we had to decide would we like to have a functionality programming, so we want to deal with the problems we have or to generate a solution, or would we like to concentrate on front ends and stuff like that? And those Ganymede for us was a very good solution because Ganymede gives you nearly for free input and output front ends for your data you store in the Ganymede database. That makes it very easy. But then you have to use that data with Java or with Perl or other languages you like. We use Java and Perl to generate the output files for your, and the reason bind solution, let's say.
Right, right. And so I'm wondering for this, is there a way, or maybe this already exists, is there a way to automate that, the generation of those Perl scripts or Java code? Is there like an easier plugin or an alternative? Here's a web-driven input form where you input all your IP addresses and configuration, and it spits out the Perl script that you might need. Is there an easier way to do that, or is it always done by hand?
It's Volker?
As far as I know, we have done it manually. So we have done it on our own. But at the University of Kaiserslautern, where this tool is used, we have a very specific approach to DNS. So we use nearly all the functions binds could do. So there are not so many institutes who really use all that functionality. So we have to program, I guess, most of things on our own.
Yeah. And did you consider alternatives? Was this your first choice, or did you look at other programs that you might have used to get a similar functionality?
We have a lot of experience with that. Though, if I have a very short second to tell a little bit about the history of IP address management at the University of Kaiserslautern, we had at the end of the 19th, we had the first master thesis dealing with that topic. And then two students, they set up a software based on SQL, Sybase database, to make the IP address management and the inventory management for the university. So that was the first software we wrote there. Then there was we tried to make it in a professional is not the right word. In a commercial way. So with a company together, we wrote a commercial program. The problem is you need to know a lot of network. You need to have a lot of network knowledge at that point, and they had database knowledge. So people programming database and front ends for a tool to deal with IP addresses, IP address management, location, which did not understand the principles of that networking problems, ends up with a program which usability was not so brilliant. And then we decided to make a new approach, and that new approach with our colleague Stefan Bier was based on Ganymede. So he decided to use Ganymede as, I would say, as a framework to program or to write a new program for our IP address management. We get rid of the inventory management a little bit, though we concentrated on IP management. In these days, QIP, although we started 2004, though in these days, QIP would be definitely an alternative for that IP address management issue, but it was not so cheap. So universities, have some resources which were called manpower. And so we solved the problem with manpower instead of paying for it. And I guess these specific solutions the university had with different zones, secondary name server at other universities, departments, and a lot of special things which could be supported by Bind, but could not be supported by the commercial tools in these days. So we decided to write our own program. So we had a lot of expertise in these fields. In the past, we run into a lot of errors and mistakes and dead-end roads and stuff like that. But nevertheless, with that experience, we could relatively good specify what we need. And we did not have enough manpower to really concentrate on front-end things and database stuff. So the alternative to write on an SQL database, your own front-end things, was a little bit too much work. And so we decided we would just like to implement that functionality for DNS and DHCP things.
You know, it's one of the things I've actually discovered working as sysadmin, not for anything that's hundreds or thousands of machines, but at least for hundreds of machines, is that there really were never any off-the-shelf solutions that worked exactly the way I wanted them to do, because we always had custom requirements. Sounds like you guys, Volker, and your group obviously had custom requirements. And I just wanted to point out here that I think that the aspect of this being open source means that you could get in, and anything that didn't have like the right API, you could probably even go in and fix the API to be what you specifically needed, right?
That's absolutely correct. Everything. Aaron asked about whether there was ways to automate that process, and that's not what Ganymede. Ganymede is designed to be completely flexible with what you need, because when you have an environment of any real scope, you're likely to have some very unique requirements, and Ganymede is designed to let you do that by both being very customizable in terms of the object model that you're managing, in terms of all the code that handles the builds. You're free to do that. Ganymede does have an XML interface, which is standardized. Which means you can do imports and exports of the Ganymede object data into XML. And if you wanted to use XML as a starting point for whatever builds you're doing or integration work, you can do that. But when it comes down to it, what's interesting is taking that the data from Ganymede and then putting it into your environment in the appropriate way. And that's not something that can be easily automated.
Now, what's the scope of the usage of Ganymede? Is it a couple installations, a couple thousand installations, or somewhere in between?
It's much closer to the former than the latter, I think. I've talked with probably on the order of maybe a couple dozen people that have made serious steps at using it. I know that a lot of them, something odd about open source is that I didn't hear from Stefan or from Volker until they had gone quite a ways towards implementation. So I've heard from people who have been using it for years, and I never knew they did. But we don't have a large user base. We're a rather specialized tool. You have to have a number of things to be able to use Ganymede. You have to have a complex enough environment to use it. You have to have enough development expertise to do the integration work that it requires. You have to have the organizational need for something like Ganymede. And that's not a huge audience. So we're larger in the course of we go deep in time and not so much deep in user base right now.
And of course, since you've gone deep in time, then what mistakes have you made along the way that you, in hindsight, wouldn't have done?
There's a lot of them at various levels. Ganymede is a very integrated product internally. That is, Ganymede doesn't have a separation of the user interface layer. It doesn't have a database, a web front end, and an application server. It's all one thing. And that's due to the time in which it was built, when time was initially developed. Ganymede's development started about the same time that MySQL's development publicly started. So at the time we were doing it, there weren't any publicly available database tools, and we wanted from the very beginning to have it be available under the GPL, and so that dictated some decisions at the time. Ganymede is not organized around a hierarchical structure like LDAP. If you're one of those sites that are using Active Directory to manage resources at several hierarchical layers across the nation, dozens of sites, Ganymede's not for that. Ganymede's limited to something more on the lines of some thousands of users in one facility that you want to share. Ganymede Ganymede's programmed in Java. We have support for Python and Java to program some of the customization features. But all of that still requires you to basically stop and restart the server if you reprogram the management intelligence. So those things, and those are things that would be nice to amend. I would love to put closure into Ganymede so that you could program it in a Lisp-like environment and then not have to restart the server. You could just keep going. There's a lot of things about Ganymede that are very right, though. Ganymede is designed so that Ganymede is only used for change management. Ganymede depends on whatever existing data distribution systems you have to do their job properly, and they do their job properly. So, if the Ganymede server is taken out, your DNS keeps going, your NIS keeps going, your LDAP keeps going. All of these things keep going without being impacted. It's only the changes have to wait until Ganymede's running again. And that decoupling, so I say Ganymede is too tightly coupled internally, but it's very loosely coupled externally, and that's a very powerful thing when you're able to make the kind of customizations you want for a custom solution.
So, in a sense, the parts that you're bringing to the picture about Ganymede, just so I can recap this a little bit, you've got a really nice web GUI front end for people to update and manage the changes and things. You've got some nice front end APIs to also push data into the system, and you've got a nice framework for writing Java, and I heard Perl. I was doing a little happy dance when somebody said Perl there, to be able to extract the data out and put it in the right formats, and Python too as well, right?
Python, we're talking here about things that actually run as logic inside the Ganymede server. We have Python in the form of Jython for that. We don't have Perl inside the server.
But Perl to be able to extract the data, right?
Oh, sure. Well, basically, Ganymede writes out data files. Like all of our build environment is done in Perl, but that's the back end. It's not part of Ganymede proper. We don't distribute that so much. Ganymede is the object database engine, the client server APIs, the intelligence for managing it. But so that's all in Java. And can be in Jython, but the actual data distribution we use in Perl and Python and Shell and all these things.
Okay, so how many of the common formats then does Ganymede know how to write to, or is that not a relevant question?
Ganymede, okay. It depends what you mean by what Ganymede knows. Ganymede knows its object model. Ganymede knows XML. That's all Ganymede knows proper. Everything else is in the form of classes that you can write and then plug into Ganymede. In our environment, we have Ganymede writing out NIS source files. We have it writing out DHCP. We have it writing out some XML for doing incremental updates to LDAP. In Volker's case, they have it writing out bind files and the like. But it's up to basically you write. If you want to write a data file, you just write a Java method or Java class, and then you have your code pull the data from the Ganymede data object data to object database, and then write it out. So you just have basically a loop and a bunch of print lines.
Are these solutions in a public place? I mean, if I wanted to write something that was a bind file, would I already know about what Volker's written? Is it someplace central then?
We don't have Volker's stuff. Their stuff is at doctordns.org, doctordns.org. If you download Ganymede from us, you will get encoded in the code base. You'll get the complete schema kit that we use, or rather the complete Java code for our custom environment, and that includes all the NIS data writing, all of that stuff. If you download Volker's stuff, you'll get something else. We distribute Ganymede with a central core, and then we have a programmable model for things called schema kits, where a schema kit includes all the Java classes required to provide the intelligence when you actually manipulate the objects and they respond to the things you try to do to them. It includes the builder tasks that will write out the data in whatever formats you need, and then the scripts that take that and put into the environment. So we have a sample schema kit that can take your NIS user password and group data, right? It takes that data from your environment, it can write it into an XML file, it can load that into Ganymede. Ganymede will have the custom classes loaded into it for all these objects, and then it has the code to write out the basically equivalent to what it read in on the back end. But again, that is where that kind of schema kit creation is where the customization comes in, and that is the tragedy and the glory of Ganymede, is that that's very flexible and you can do whatever you like with that.
So again, if I was trying to deploy this in my organization, or even like at work there, where I might want to see if I can get them off of having separate Windows and Unix passwords, and they have hundreds of systems, so it sounds like it's the right scale for Ganymede.
Yes.
What's the deployment path? How much do I have to install? What do I have to read about? What do I have to write by hand? And where can I go for support? What's the deployment path?
Okay, well, it depends on what's already existing on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
Ganymede is self-contained in the sense that it doesn't require any databases or Java application servers. You just download Ganymede and you've got that. Mm-hmm. So what you'll be then presented with is you'll need to create the data model that you want to have. That is, in our environment, we have objects in Ganymede for users, groups, system net groups, user net groups, email lists, email redirects, IP networks, systems, interfaces, DHCP control groups, DHCP custom options, all of these things. And so we create. You'd have to create a schema. Say, this is what I want to model. Okay, you've got users, you have groups, whatever you have. You have to create the schema using a schema editor. So you can say, I want an object called this that has these fields. It's got a string field. It's got an IP address field. It's got a whatever. So you get that.
And that's customizable, so I could even, like, for example, if I want to have, like, my user base, I want to also have the desk location in there or a phone extension. I can put that all in the same database.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. You can use either an XML editor or a direct GUI editor to set that up. You can create all the objects you want. You can set up the relationships between them, which, like, this object points to that. This field of this object points to that field and that object, and they have a linkage between the two of them. So you do that. You figure out what you want the actual objects to be. And then we have a standard XML import facility where you can take whatever data you might already have, and you'd have to get that data, gather it together, put it into an XML file, and feed that into Ganymede. At that point, Ganymede's running. It has all these objects. It has the data for your environment. Then you need what's called a builder task, which is a Java class file that basically has a method that is run when a transaction is made that will then write out the data files in whatever form is appropriate. Mm-hmm. And then you have your Perl scripts or your Python scripts or whatever you have that takes the output of that build and then will put it back into your environment. So we've done synchronizations to NIS, DNS, DHCP. Volker's team's done DNS and DHCP. We have a rather sophisticated Python package that can do synchronizations of individual changes to Active Directory and Open Directory in the Macintosh. Mm-hmm. So you'd basically be sort of picking among a Chinese menu of those synchronization options, but then it'd be up to you to write the Java code to actually connect that into Ganymede.
So this is not a 1 hour install. This is more like it sounds like about a month.
Yes, depends on your expertise level.
Okay, well, I'm just trying to get the scope of this. I mean, and so we've got, this organization, and speaking of my main client, has probably a couple hundred users and probably about 400 machines. So, and so there'd be that kind of scope of thing and being able to plug it into the various things and hopefully eventually unifying this whole notion of Unix password versus Windows password, which drives me nuts. So it's not. This is not for the faint of heart. It's not for people who have only 5 machines. Where does it start making sense? To think about Ganymede.
We've done, like, I did an installation last week that involved on the order of 100 users and about 500 systems, and they were already using NIS, and they already had their scripts to generate their DNS and DHCP. So that was a 1-week task to get the data that they had, clean it up. One of the problems we have a lot of the time is if you have people who've been hand editing files, there tends to be inconsistencies, and Ganymede doesn't like inconsistencies. It tries very hard to maintain a consistent environment. So data cleanup was first, write the scripts to get it into XML, into Ganymede, and then back out and to use their pre-existing distribution system. That was about a week.
Now, you said you were doing that, so you have expertise, obviously, in this that I wouldn't have if I was going to do it in my company. What kind of support is there? Is there IRC chat channels, mailing lists, things like that?
We have a forum on the Ganymede website. If you Google for Ganymede, we'll be on the first page, and we have some forums there. We used to have an email list, but that got overrun by spam, so we just do it on the forums now.
Mm-hmm. And what do you have in terms of public? I mean, how is this project managed? Is there a public bug reporting system, public repository for the code, that sort of thing?
Yeah, there is. If you go to our website, we have a complete copy of our Git repository that you can access. We have Bugzilla. We have all of that.
And how many people are actively committing to the project at the moment?
Very few. Mostly me, but at the moment, probably there's 3 or 4.
And are you getting any kind of patches or feedback or bug reports from outside your organization?
Yes, we've gotten quite a few from Volker's group, actually.
Mm-hmm.
But no, we don't get a lot.
And Volker, let me just ask you for that then. What sort of problems did you find when you first took Ganymede and adapted it to your organization that required actual patches or changes upstream?
We don't have so many problems with patches and problems in the Ganymede itself. We run into a problem with user management, but that was solved by Jonathan very fast. That is one of the good things, because if you have a small user base, you got handled very explicitly. So if you have problems, you get answers very quick. So we don't have so many problems with the Ganymede core itself. We had to deal with all the functionalities the university wants to put in that program, and that was the point where we put a lot of time in. So we have, as Jonathan said, we have to set up the objects. That was not so easy task, because, as I said, we had to deal with a lot of special purposes. And then the second thing was we have to import our bind data. At the University of Kaiserslautern, where it's used, it's roughly 14,000 hosts, so it's not a very small installation. You don't to do that manually. So we used the XML input possibility to get bulk data in to the Ganymede system. And then the third step was to concentrate really on the output. So that we used that post-processing feature of Ganymede to generate XML data, and then we have to process these XML data to our bind files and DHCP server configs. We don't have so many we did not have so many actual problems with the Ganymede core itself. For us, it was in the beginning more a philosophic question, because if you use Ganymede, you have some restrictions how the front end looks like. It gives you a front end nearly for free, but it has some restriction how it looks like. So you could not arrange fields in every size and something like that. So for us, it was a decision. Functionality was a focus, and so we got the front end for free. One very important thing was you can override the object function for the validation of the fields. So if you enter an IP address, we had to check if it is in the right subnet, if it is in that building and that floor and stuff like that, and you can write your own validation functions. And that was very brilliant, because it's very important to have the consistency of the data, and it's not that it's in the right format, it's that the right IP address in the right building and in the right floor maps to the right network and things like that. And that we use these functions very, very heavily.
Now, that sounds like what you're doing, Volker, is you're not only one of the biggest users of Ganymede, but are you also then repackaging it in this Dr. DNS distribution, and how's that turned out?
Yeah, we don't have really repackaged it. We are using it actually only at the University of Kaiserslautern. So there's only one customer who's using it actually. So it was really programmed for a problem. And so we don't have actually any other customers. So it's open source, it's there. Everyone who's interested can download it. We'll discuss things, we give support and stuff like that. But actually the University of Kaiserslautern is the only customer which is using that product. Okay. And it's not commercially sold in any way. It's really, we have a cooperation with the university, and though it is built up in that cooperation process.
So this question came out of the chat room just a moment ago, Jonathan. So how many, are most of the installations probably universities then, or do you know of some commercial organizations that are using this?
I know of some commercial organizations that have used it. I know that Ericsson in Sweden was using it for a while. I don't know whether they are still. But typically typically, as Volker said, you want some place where the manpower is cheap, and so they often is university environments.
Okay, very cool, very cool. So I think I've gotten through most of the list here. Is there anything I'm leaving out? What's the future? What's the future of Ganymede? Where are you going with that?
Well, we run Ganymede 24/7. It's an essential part of our environment, and so as long as we're around, we're going to be maintaining Ganymede and improving it. I would like to, like I said, possibly put closure into Ganymede, possibly smooth out some of its rough edges and making it so that you can do these very complicated kinds of programming in it without having to have the discontinuous service.
Okay. Okay. Very cool. Well, is there anything else that I've left out that you want to make sure we cover?
Just that Ganymede is Ganymede's a framework. It's designed for people to program in it. It has a lot of intelligence about how directory services work, how you do resource allocation, unique value allocations. It's deeply transactional. It allows you to have it provides a lot of resources for you to build things with it, but you are going to be building things with it. So,
very cool, very cool. And Volker, any last words?
No. One thing, maybe one. It is, as Jonathan just said, we used it exactly for that. We used it as a framework. We have to program a lot of things on our own, but it was very flexible, and it gives you a lot of freedom. So it's not a product in any kind, but you can build up your own solution in a very easy way, in a very easy fashion. And so we don't concentrate on SQL database constructions. We don't concentrate on front ends. We concentrate on objects, put in data, put data out, and convert it to bind files and things like that. And that was very easy to use.
Well, I appreciate you coming on the show today, Volker, to talk about your use of Ganymede, and also you, Jonathan, to talk about how Ganymede has progressed and what kinds of things it's good for.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. So that was Jonathan Abbey, who works at the University of Texas and in the Applied Research Laboratories, and also Volker Bauer, who is at the someplace in Germany. I don't have the exact thing in front of me, sadly. Anyway, one of the big users of Ganymede. So what do you think, Aaron?
It sounds really interesting. I think that the opportunity here, as I see it, I'm always interested in deployment, right? So, I mean, the big opportunity that I see here is that, if someone could come along and write a wrapper or, some sort of a plug-in system or something to make it just easier to configure, easier to set up, that would be perfect. And since it is open source, anybody can come in and do that. But I think that it's really, really interesting, and I think it does solve a lot of problems that people have. And it makes sense that universities are using it because, like Volker said, universities have the time to spend, the manpower to spend on implementing this the correct way and writing all these scripts to get the data in and out and so forth. Whereas a large company may not want to, pay their employees to do that. But it seems like if you could come alongside this and build in some wrappers, make it easy, maybe some quick configuration scripts in Perl with a web front end would be nice, and then just plug in your data and it outputs the scripts that need to run and sets them up in cron automatically. That would be dynamite.
Well, as I always say, grad students are cheaper than any employee we could ever have. So that's probably partly how they can get away with that. But, it is interesting, though, because I was thinking about this as I was listening to their answers, is that the real problem is in things like sysadmin is that you have a lot of things that have to be done in common. I mean, just managing the notion of a user and what he has access to, and managing the notion of a router and a port and a host and all that sort of stuff. These notions are common. They're very, very consistent across implementations. But what you have to do with that data and the sort of business rules that have to get layered on top of that are very, very organization specific. And so I think it's kind of interesting that what Ganymede is providing is sort of that common area for the things that really are common, and then letting you have enough APIs on both ends, both feeding into it and coming out of it, that you can really do the adaptation that you need for your organization.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's too bad that there isn't a common shared configuration between all of these different servers, and it just doesn't exist today. So you have to have something like this in order to make your life less miserable.
Well, listen, even taking the original, like the Linux comp files, if you count, at one point we counted something like 60 different formats for things like .ini files and .cshrc, and then people were saying, well, XML is the universal configuration format, and everybody else went, XML. So it was like this complex. You can't even agree within one system how things need to look. And if somebody, in a typical heterogeneous environment, you've got Linux boxes, you've got Solaris boxes, you've got Open Solaris, which is slightly different. You've got BSD systems, you've got, legacy systems, giant machines that have been around, big iron stuff. Trying to get this to all agree is always going to be a problem. Let's put Windows in there too. I forgot. Windows is probably the thing that makes it the weirdest, but I'm going to get slammed by my Windows friends for that. But it's just, there's so many different ways to do this, and there's been so many different solutions, and now people are deploying multiple solutions. Like you've got LDAP and NIS, which are two completely different things trying to come at the same issue, but they'll both be deployed within an organization because some machines speak only LDAP, some speak only NIS. Crazy, huh?
Yeah, it really is. It's a real nightmare. And at least this Ganymede starts to address at least having a central place to manage all that functionality.
And I do like it too. I forget the name of the movement recently, but there's this notion of the fact that IT people really need to be more software engineers, really, to get their job done now. And so we have things like Ganymede popping up to really sort of help this level of trying to manage the IT situation. I know my friends will probably tell me in the chat room, the thing where people are being designers in the IT area. Nope, chat room hasn't come through yet. Anyway, and I'm going to get killed for not knowing the word at the top of my tongue. So, but there's this notion that you really do need to have an engineering background. You need to have a software development background, really, to be in IT these days. It's no longer just shell scripting and Perl scripting are going to be able to cover it for you. DevOps.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you there, the chat room, my computer. So this whole notion of DevOps, where you really have developer-level activity happening on your operations team to get your 5 nines of reliability, your scalability, things like that, and it's really like a whole new arena because there's just so much going on in this area.
Yeah, and that's why you have people that now have the title architect as opposed to just admin. It's the architects that have to come in, understand, like you're saying, the architecture, the system architecture, the software architecture, how it all plays together. Because if you don't have that, you're always going to have all these separate pieces, being managed by different people, and it's never going to actually work together cohesively.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of working together cohesively, that's my segue to upcoming guests. I always have to make it as non sequitur as possible now. Anyway, so what we have coming up very shortly on the short list, we have, speaking of another thing that's sort of a DevOps related thing, we've got Thomas Garan coming on next week talking about GPL Host, which is a provisioning system to allow you to take hardware and put virtual hosts on it in a nice, clean, orderly way for either for internal use or for reselling to customers. And then, again, a show I'm really looking forward to. David Ankers and James Cotton are going to speak to us about Open Pilot, which is the unattended, unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, whatever UAVs means. They're going to come talk to us about software that keeps the system, the plane flying level and heading off in the direction you want based on GPS coordinates and so on. It's going to be really fun. I hope they have some video with them too. That'll be a lot of fun coming out.
Definitely.
That'll be really great.
That sounds great.
And then just added to the schedule, I've already recorded this show. And I miss Jono. I miss Jono Bacon really a lot on this show. And I know you guys in the audience all do too, because I get letters like every week, bring Jono back. Well, I am bringing him back for a special holiday edition, a very special show, a very special FLOSS Weekly holiday edition, where he's going to come back and talk about, I've already interviewed him, so I don't know what's going to be in the interview, but Severed Fifth, his project, his open source music project. And he's got some really revolutionary ideas. It's really going a lot further than just write some music and put it out in Creative Commons. He's really got the whole game plan really thought through. So we're going to put that in during the 2 weeks that I'm actually out on a cruise. I'm on a Christmas cruise for Sky and Telescope magazine. Going to be seeing the lunar eclipse while I'm out at sea. It's going to be a lot of fun. And then rounding out the year, we've got TikiWiki. Mark Laporte's going to come on, not related to Leo Laporte, just Mark Laporte. He's going to talk about TikiWiki, which has started out life as a wiki and eventually evolved to have every possible feature known to man, creating it a groupware platform. So a lot of other people on the short list, twit.tv/floss. There's a link there to my spreadsheet. If you see agreed to a show, negotiating dates, then they've contacted me, and I'm just trying to slot them in at the earliest possible slot I have. If they're further down on that sheet, it means that they haven't contacted me. So I've got so many people in that first category, not likely to get to any of those in the second category. So if you want your project on the show, you have the project leader. If that's you, it's you then. Or have the project leader email me, merlin@stonehenge.com. My email address is all over that sheet. Lots of people on the short list. I just love the fact that you guys out there in my audience are helping me out, figuring out what you really want to hear about on the show. And it's really a great diversity of things, and I'm really appreciating that. It's just been a lot of fun. So so where can people find out about you, Aaron?
You can always go to thesourceshow.org, or you can go to aaronnewcomb.com. I think last time I was on, I mentioned I released a short episode, so you can go check that out. And it was kind of funny because actually Leo played some of my episodes after I was on last time, kind of as some filler material. But yeah, definitely go to thesourceshow.org, check that out. I've got a lot more things coming as soon as I can find my camera. I lost my camera in the move. I have no idea where it is. So maybe Santa will be nice for Christmas. I don't know.
That'll probably do it. And for those of you watching on the live stream or watching the video, you see this nice, wonderful stained glass behind me. This is I have to say, I'm sad. This is the last time you're going to see this stained glass ever on Floss Weekly. I'm moving out of this house by the time I record the next show here. So this is the last you'll see. Hopefully it's going into storage somewhere, and I can put it up to whatever next house I move into if I don't just become a nomad, but that's a longer story. You can read my blog at merlin.posterous.org. No, merlin.posterous.com. You can read my blog to find out really why I'm doing that and becoming more of a nomad. So that's it. So say goodbye to the stained glass. Any last words, Aaron?
No, that's it. Just really looking forward to the upcoming episodes. They sound great.
I am too. That's why I do this show. It's a labor of love, except when we have the occasional sponsor, which has been a while again. But it's a labor of love for me. But you know, I put in probably 5 hours a week into this show, and it's fine. It's what I want to be doing, and I love having y'all out there saying good things about the show to each other. And I'm always watching the blog posts that mention Floss Weekly or the Twitter posts that mention Floss Weekly, and I follow up to those. And I really appreciate all the publicity that you guys give me for this show, because it makes it that much more satisfying for me to know that it's actually impacting people out there. So just love y'all, audience. Thanks for being there, and happy holidays. And for all of you who are celebrating some sort of holiday coming up soon, or even if you aren't, if it's later, that's fine too. All right, and so we'll see you next time on Floss Weekly.